Hi, this is John Wellington. I'm back with JerrysArtarama to do another lesson. This one is my favorite lesson. It's the ball and cylinder. It's the most basic lesson. Many of you have already had it in art school. You probably had it too many times. For me, it can never be enough times, especially for myself. I use what I teach in this all the time in my painting, whether I'm rendering an arm or a face or a nose or an ear or a ball on a cylinder. So I'm going to be using Tuscan pine paint, which is the paints I now use. I have titanium white, ivory black, burnt sienna, raw sienna, and viridian. This is my limited palette for flesh. It is not the only colors I use in painting flesh, but with these colors, I can get many ranges of flesh colors. The green I have in also because I use green for many of my underpaintings. It was originally terra verte, but I tend to like viridian, has a little bit more punch. And in another demo, I will get into underpainting and I will get into how to use these colors effectively. So now I'm going to do my ball and cylinder. The first step, of course, is drawing a ball, a sphere. And this lesson is really not just about showing you how to render form, but also to give you a vocabulary. So they say that Leonardo could draw a perfect sphere, a perfect ball. I'm not Leonardo, so don't expect. For those of you who have seen my last demo, you'll know that I correct my corrected corrections. And so you're going to see a lot of lines before I get to a perfect sphere. Now, one of the things I did here, because any demo I do, it's always going to be about other things as well, because it's all the process of painting, even if it's the simplest demo, is that for the most part, I thinned out with a medium. In this case, it's a Galkide medium, and I thinned it out with I thinned out my paint so that I could make changes. In other words, I didn't want to start like that. And the reason is that that's just hard to adjust. And just think about when you're doing a pencil drawing, you're starting out with a light touch. It's the exact same thing. So now I'm going to take that off. And now I'm going to do a cylinder, or in this case, it's going to act as two straight lines. And again, it's a light touch. There are many people I've taught in the beginners that said they could not draw a straight line. I'm going to teach you how to draw a straight line right now, at least on a vertical. And that is just to get some paint or pencil. And don't draw with your wrist. Just draw with your arm. So you put your hand here and just move it straight down like that. You get a straight line. So for anybody who's ever said, I can't draw a straight line, that problem's been solved. Although mine is at an angle, but so I can't draw a straight line. All right, so now I have my ball and I have my cylinder. If you're doing this at home and you want to work from life, I get like a Spalding handball and a toilet paper roll. And this is how I learned. I set these up. I painted them a neutral gray, let's say like a number 3, and then I take one light. In this case, I'm going to bring my light right from here, and so I shine it. So I'm doing this from imagination, but if you were to really want to master this, you would actually set up a ball, and you'd set up a cylinder, and you would light it in such a way that you would paint from it. And doing this will help you in every single situation where you need to show form and depth. So now everything is in life around us is light and shadow. Every object casts shadow if it's lit. The only time you don't see this is in pure darkness, but if the moon is out, you'll see shadows dancing across the landscape. So what I'm doing here is I'm lighting this ball, and it's going to be a light world and a shadow world. And I'm just going to draw a line where I'm imagining it to be. And this ball is going to cast a shadow, take away light from this cylinder right here, like that. And also, so that's going to be a cast shadow. And this line here, this is going to be a form shadow. And then we're going to have another form shadow right here, like that. And another cast shadow where this cylinder and this ball right there. Here, I'll put it on the table. Edge of a table, there we go. So now I have a circle and two straight lines that we're reading as a ball and cylinder. Again, remember that anytime you're working, they always talk about virtual, three-dimensional virtual worlds or virtual art in zeros and ones. But the original virtual art was drawing and painting, creating spaces on walls on flat surfaces. So even though this is just these are just lines, we're already reading them as a ball and a cylinder. So now I'm going to take some more medium, and I'm going to do a thin, I'm just using black right now. I'm using thin washes, and I'm going to start to put in a shadow. And when I'm working like this, for anybody who's never oil painted but would like to start oil painting, this is like working in charcoal or working in pencil. All I'm doing is, if this was charcoal, I'd just be putting in a dark area of charcoal. And I would say for people who are starting off oil painting, a lot of people think, oh no, I draw and I do watercolor, but I'm afraid of oil paint. I mean, you really don't have to be afraid. If you know how to draw or if you feel comfortable with a pencil, you just put the brush in your hand and it's kind of the same thing. I mean, really is. And especially if you move slowly like I'm doing. So here I'm doing the wash. As a matter of fact, the brush in French is called pinceau. So there we go. That's how. I apologize to everybody French who just heard my mispronunciation. So here's the cast shadows. I mean, there's the cast shadow. This is a form shadow. So I've already just given you two vocabulary words. And this demo is going to be some vocabulary words. So the first is form shadow, and the second is cast shadow. And the answer is in the words. A form shadow is a shadow that it falls on the form of an object. A cast shadow is a shadow where it's cast by another object. If I put my brush here, you can see actually there's multiple cast shadows, but this is the primary one. And if I take the object away, there's no shadow. So that is a cast shadow. A form shadow falls on the form. So now when you're out looking at nature or looking at doing a portrait, you can start to think, okay, is that a form shadow and is that a cast shadow? And you say, okay, why is that important? Well, it's important, as we'll get in later, because each type of shadow has different properties found in nature. So right now here it's my cast shadow and my form shadow, cast shadow, form shadow, and here this is on a tabletop, and that is also a form shadow, because in this case, this tabletop is a sharp edge, unlike a ball and cylinder, which brings me now to the next vocabulary. So a tabletop that, in this case, it has a sharp edge, you see that it doesn't turn. This is one edge of the table, and then as it's falling off to the side, that's the other edge. Now, the ball, however, does not have a straight line. It continues to turn. It continues to move, so this sharp edge is not going to work. So there's a terminology that I use. Different artists or different teachers might have different names for it, but I call it a halftone. So the halftone is probably the most important thing in painting something that's curving. And the halftone is the blurred edge between the light world and the shadow world. Now in this case, I'm not gonna mix. If you notice, I'm just doing everything with one color here, which is black. I can already hear that black is not a color, but in the way I define it, it is. And I'm just going to take a brush without paint, and I'm just going to soften this. And I'm going to soften this. Because these are the form shadows have to have that blurred edge. Right there, like that. There we go. And that blurred edge, and here I'll just... So I'm just going to reestablish my shadow right here as I work for my halftone. Now I cannot emphasize enough that I've started this painting as if I was starting a charcoal drawing or a pencil drawing. And the stroke I'm using right here, this is kind of a hat stroke. If you notice, it's a short stroke like this. This is very much a basic old master painting stroke. It's the stroke that they used when they did pen and ink, when they did pencil drawing, and it translates into painting. I think one of the things I want to stress, there are a number of things I'm going to stress in this demo, but one of them is that if you draw, you can oil paint, and that it is the same motions. And this idea of sort of separating the arts that, oh, I draw, but I can't do this, you should throw that out the window. If you can do one thing, it segues into another. It just takes a little getting used to. So in this case, that's why I'm starting with just one color. And you notice I'm just keep moving my brush on it. And here I'm going to work on my halftone. And I'm not doing the halftone on my cast shadows, just on my form shadows. Now I'm going to give you my definition of a halftone. Again, different teachers will have different definitions and different words, different, it's jargon, right? And we have used different jargon. So this is my definition. A halftone is the blurred edge between the light world and the shadow world on a curved object. Just so you don't have to rewind, say it again. The halftone is the blurred edge between the light world and the shadow world on a curved object. So while you're looking around, look around at your desk, look around at the frame around a door, look at a ball, look at a cylinder of a lamp, and especially when it's not too reflective, and you'll start to see the differences in edges. And the harder the edge between two planes, the sharper it's going to be, like a tabletop. And the softer the edge, the more rounded. So something like when you're looking at a person's face, you're going to see around foreheads. It's going to be usually, there's always exceptions. It's going to be softer halftones, softer transitions. Around cheeks, softer transitions. Get to the nose, harder transition. Lips, a little bit harder transition, but all softer transition than, say, the edge of this palette. So these are just things you start to notice. So right now, I will get into cast shadows. Cast shadows don't have a halftone per se. They have something else, which I will get to in a little bit later. But right now, I just want to get to this. So now we see the difference between here and here. So I've done, just again to bring the charcoal analogy of oil paint, this is what I've done. I haven't gone this dark yet, but this is black. And as I bring black down, with either, in this case, this is a scumble or dry brush, or I add some medium. Without even using white, what I'm doing is I'm able to change the value. Just like charcoal, just like pencil. When I start out, I don't want to start out here. I want to start out light. I want to give myself room to make errors. And just again, even if I was drawing in ink, I would do light strokes of ink before I went heavier. So now that I've done that, I'm going to clean my brush. And I'm using a filbert brush. A filbert defines a shape. It's not quite a flat. It's not quite a round. There is no right or wrong brush. It is the brush that works for you. And the way to learn about brushes is to ask friends. If you're in an art school, look at other people who are using brushes that you like. Go to art supply shops like Jerry's, and they'll always help you, find the brush you're looking for. And then get as many as you can afford, because brushes are like kitchen knives. You just want them. So now with the white, I'm going to do the same thing. This is at the full percentage. And now I'm going to drag it down to get a darker value. So you can see, without doing something what I would call cross-mixing, let's get that a little bit, I can reduce the value. There we go. Wow, that white is actually. But you see how without mixing, it's starting to look grayer. So already you can see with limited palettes what you can do. So now now that I have it grayed out, I'm now going to do my light world. My highlight, which I'll get back to, is going to be right about here. My highlight here is going to be here. And now I'm going to clean my brush-ish. Still have some white in it. And I'm going to start. This is sort of a scrubby technique of applying paint. And as I scrub it out, it's going to get darker. So you notice it's mixing in a little bit with the black, but it's also, like here, as it's being thinned out, it is getting darker. So this is giving me now my general light. And because I remember that halftone, I'm working on that halftone. So I'm taking some paint off my brush. If I don't want to be married to my same brush, of course, I can take another brush, taking some mineral spirits off it, and I can always do a blending like this. This is a dab, like that. There's a name for it. Supposedly, that Leonardo da Vinci, wrote in his notebooks. I've never seen it, so I'm saying supposedly. He called it batejando, which means to hit or jab. And when you look at a Leonardo and you see those beautiful transitions, as I was saying, in areas like the foreheads and cheeks of his portraits, it's a beautiful jabbing motion. So here I'm just doing that. And again, I'm not cross-mixing. I will cross-mix, but I'm not doing it now on purpose. And the reason I'm not doing it on purpose is because I just want to show you that learning how to control minimal amount of paint will allow you, well, not allow you, it'll help you when you have many, many colors. And the whole idea, it's like, adding color, it's like spices when cooking. You want to get good with salt and pepper, but then you want to use everything. You want to use herbs and spices and saffron. You want to use everything in cooking, but you want to start with the basics to understand what you can do. So in this case of just using black and white, right now I'm still doing a stroke like this and straight strokes. You'll mix them up. You practice them. If you do pen and ink at all, that will help you a lot with your paint strokes, because a lot of the old master paint strokes are based on pen and ink strokes. And many of the early paintings of the Quattrocento, in fact, their underpaintings were done in pen and ink. So if you look underneath an Albrecht Dürer or Hans Memling or other artists of that period, you'll see that their underpaintings were not done in oil initially. It changed sometimes. Sometimes there were later were, but often done in pen and ink. Even Bruegel, a lot of their works were done in pen and ink. So here we see the halftone, and we see the light world, the shadow world. Then within the shadow world, the cast shadow, the form shadow. Here I'll do the table top. Hard, no transition, right? No halftone because it's a sharp edge. there is there's a subject that I love to teach, which is composition. I actually think composition is the most important thing that you need to know as an artist. More important than how to draw a hand or anatomy or glazing or underpainting, that composition transcends everything. And one of my rules is in my composition class is the rule of gradation. So here, you're going to see gradation on this flat surface from the area where it meets the edge to the area right here. It's going to be stronger. I'll have a stronger white right here. And you see I'm building up my whites very much the way I will build up my shadows. So here, it's a stronger white. Let's say it's a white table. Or this could be an underpainting. Like if I was doing an underpainting in black and white, and many of you know what an underpainting is called. It's called a grisette, and a grisette means gray. So an underpainting, traditional underpaintings, as we think of them, were often black and white, although, of course, in reality, there were underpaintings in greens, as I mentioned earlier, pen and ink, and later on with artists like Maxfield Parrish, his underpaintings were in blue. So you can do underpaintings in many colors. So here, I'm just going to get the table. I'm also painting the table, my ball and cylinder, for another reason. Now, when I'm doing values or when I'm painting that, nothing, you can do this in art, of course. I could just paint a ball and cylinder on the brown and that would be fine. But nothing in nature is isolated. And there's always something against it. And so everything is relationships. So I paint the background here, not just to show you the difference between a non-curved edge and a curved edge, but I also paint the background to start to think about relationships between objects, to convince you on some level that this ball and cylinder might sit on the table if I got my ellipse better. Ellipse, by the way, is a circle, in the way I'm defining it, is a circle seen in perspective. And that's a different conversation. So right now, I have, again, light world, shadow world, halftone. But now within the light world and shadow world, there are different lights and different shadows. So here, we've all heard the term highlight. So I'm going to define highlight as the brightest area. So right here is my brightest area of the ball. And I'll say that right here, as the light is hitting it, my imaginary light is the brightest area of the cylinder. And actually, while I have it, there's a lip on this table that's very hard. In fact, it's not just a table, it's sort of stone, and there's chips that I'll paint. Maybe it's granite or something. So now that's the highlight, which is also known as the light light. So the light light, we have the light light, then we'll have a middle light, we'll have a dark light, the halftone, and that will take care of the lights. I'm only separating it into 3, which is because you could, of course it's infinite, but just in terms of to codify it, I want to do it in 3s. So here, see, I'm again, it's that brush stroke, that short little hatch mark. And I'm just hatching it out away from that highlight. And every single time that you touch paint, you darken it and dull it. I'll just show you on the side. Think of this as my workbook. So here is the paint just as it is. But now as I blend it, look what happens. See, it immediately gets less bright. Do you see that difference? That's very important to know. You will have a teacher at some point in your life say, do not put a paint down, and do not touch it again. Now, I understand what they're saying, and I agree with it if you want something at the highest chroma and the brightest. Don't touch it with your brush, because the moment you touch it, you'll get from that to that. But there's many reasons to touch it, because you don't always want to paint everything at high chroma or at the highest value. So that is a great thing to know, that by not touching, you can keep it very bright, like here. See, if I want to reestablish that highlight right there, I've reestablished it. And as I touch it away, I'm getting darker. And now I can do from my highlight to my middle light. And now what was light before is in fact going to become, I'm just going to get a new piece of the rag, is now going to become darker. And there's that hatch mark that I'm doing, or pencil mark. And again, the trick to learning how to oil paint is to not think that you're oil painting. The trick to oil painting is to take all your strengths as a draftsman in pencil and color pencil, in pen and ink and charcoal, and just transfer it. And if you do that, you will start oil painting. And then there are tricks of the trade, things like glazing and history of the paint and all the things I love to teach. That is the fun things you can do with oil paint that make it different, let's say, than just working with pencil. I shouldn't say just working with pencil. Working with pencil is great. So I'm doing the same thing here. All these intentional little bird lines are just that, they're unintentional. This is the filbert telling me to use a round brush, because with a round brush I wouldn't get those lines. The only thing I don't like about the filbert, and I do like the filbert, but it still has a calligraphy feel to it. And the round brush, which was used by most old masters, does not, it's multi-directional. The filbert is more multi-directional than a flat, which was used later in the 19th century. Here you see I'm working on my halftones, getting that blurred edge. But the flat was a primary brush. The round was a primary brush. The flat was really more for decorative painting, because the flat or the bright could give you a very sharp line this way and a very flat line that way. The filbert's a wonderful compromise, but the round allows you just to blend in a way without having a directional, having to make a directional choice. So when Leonardo was painting, when Velázquez was painting, they were painting with rounds. By the time you get to Van Gogh, rounds and flats. I don't know the origin of the filbert, but I have to imagine it was discovered by Monsieur or Madame Filbert. Maybe. I'm making that up. That's a man fact. But who knows? So anyway, that's the ball and cylinder so far. The light, the middle light, the dark light, the halftone. I often say I fight for the halftone, and if you see my brush moving, you'll see that I'm going back and forth. And I'm just, because the halftone doesn't always come so easily, but it's so important. And hopefully right now this is starting to look a little bit like a ball and cylinder. Let's see if I can. Now I haven't cross-mixed, right? I have not done anything with these other colors, but now I will. So now I'm just going to do a background. This canvas, this is a Centurion canvas. It's linen, oil primed linen. It's very nice. I prefer linen to cotton duck because I like the interesting textures that linen gives me. I like oil primed linen as opposed to acrylic primed linen, but again, this is all personal taste. If someone someone should always choose a surface that they are enjoying working on. That's the right surface to use. Jean-Michel Basquiat painted on found objects in the East Village, doors, wood frames, as well as canvases. and his paintings are beautiful, powerful. So here I am mixing Viridian and white, and I'm just getting a background here. And I actually want something a little bit darker. And there's something very important, actually, that I just forgot to tell you. My imprimatur is burnt sienna, laid in with mineral spirits, very thin. I laid it in yesterday, and it's already dry to the touch, more or less. But it's also warm. So I know that if I do something warm underneath, I want to do something cooler on top. So this green, which is the temperature of the color, which is cooler, meaning pulling towards the blue, warmer, pulling towards the yellow, is going to look very nice on this imprimatura, on this colored ground. The other reason for doing background is while I'm drawing from the inside out, working like this helps me draw from the outside in. I hope that makes sense. That I can do my corrections from here to here, but now I can start to make corrections this way too. So let me just keep doing this. Go around. Whoops. Some of you familiar from the last video remember my whoops. There's a whoops right there. Thankfully, it's just paint. Just oil paint, one of the more forgiving. I wish everything in life was as forgiving as oil paint. And I'm just getting my drawing better. And controlling the edges. I had a painting teacher in high school, my senior year, named Ken Rush Jr. You can still find him. He's really quite an amazing teacher. And he said to me, although he doesn't remember saying this to me, I think I was 17 years old or 18 years old. This was in Brooklyn, where a tree grows. And he said, "Great painting is great edges." And I looked at him with this profound statement, and I said, "Ken, I have no idea what that means." I do now. He talked about controlling edges, and that great painting is a controlled edge. Now, he didn't define the edge, and I think I've interpreted what he said from decades and decades ago to mean that there is no right or wrong edge, but it's being responsible for your edges. So a harder edge is going to bring your eye to an area. A softer edge, like in a Vermeer in certain areas, is going to recede. It's like depth of field in photography, where you have blurry areas and sharper areas. Controls, it's another rule of my composition. And it's just something that as I'm working on here, as I'm doing the background and the ball and cylinder, I'm also thinking about these edges, and I'm leaving a little bit of the brown of the imprimatur coming through. And right here, as I messed up on my edge, I'm going to take I'll take a brush without paint. You'll notice I often paint with a brush without paint. And I think of it like sculpting, where you're not just always adding clay, but sometimes you're pushing the clay with your fingers. So I think of this brush, this round brush without paint, as kind of my finger pushing clay, or a clay tool, where it's not adding, it's just manipulating. And if you'll see, a lot of the painting that I'm doing is putting a color down or a value down or a paint down, and then just manipulating it. So whether it has paint on it or no paint on it, that it's a great tool. So if you ever thought about, like, well, how does Holbein, how does Dürer, how does Leonardo, how does Velázquez get all these different effects? Some of it is painting without paint on a brush. So it's just something to try. For anybody who's ever done charcoal, it's using a stub or using a cloth to rub things away, or if you're working in a pencil drawing, moving your finger. So again, very much like painting. Okay, so now I have my light world, my highlight, my middle light, my dark light, my halftone. Now I'm going to get to my shadows. So I think now I'm going to start mixing paint. So I have cross mixed here with green and white, but I've kept my peanut butter. I guess that's my peanut butter and that's my jelly, or I've kept them separate, but now I'm going to mix them. And so let's see, I'll use this brush. So actually, I'm going to use that one. Again, there's no right brush, but there's a brush that you think that will get what you need done. So now for the first time, I'm mixing my grays. And here you can see. So one of the great things about not mixing in the beginning, and this is going to go to any of you who have ever said, I've tried oil painting, but everything gets muddy. Now, when they're saying muddy, they don't really mean mud, because in fact, two of my colors are dirt, right, from Siena or around the towns of Siena, right? Raw dirt and burnt dirt, right? Raw sienna and burnt sienna, which is mud. Raw umber, mud or dirt. Clays, there's a lot of earth colors. Terra verte are from the earth. So this is, you add water to that dirt, you get mud. So the problem with oil painting is not that the colors get muddy, it's that the values get muddy. So one of the reasons that I started without cross mixing, just doing white and just doing black, or I could have done this demo in white and brown or white and green, is that by not cross mixing these two colors, they can't get muddy. This is going to be bright and this is going to be dark. So if you're nervous about controlling your values, which is something to be a little concerned about with oil painting, I would say that that's a great solution, is for the longest, especially in building up something like an underpainting, go the longest period of time you can without cross mixing, and you're not going to get muddy. And then be aware of that so that when you do start to cross mix your values, like this, that you try and keep to that what you've already set up. So now I'm going to make a darker value here, and you notice even on the palette, I'm taking some paint off, or I can take it off here. If you ever look at unfinished paintings from like the 19th century portraits, you'll see on the side, you'll see a lot of brush marks. And those brush marks are paint that are unframed. You'll see that they do that to sort of control, they do it to control the paint. So that's what I'm doing there. And rather than doing it on the palette, I'm doing it there. So right now, I am now below my halftone, I'm doing another value. And this value, I'm going to call it, although it's not that dark, but I'll show you. I'm going to call it my dark shadow. There are some teachers that will call it a core shadow. Again, these are just vocabulary words, right? And so it's whatever vocabulary, whatever word, whatever jargon makes you remember, or that was taught to you, is the jargon that you should use. So I use either core shadow or dark shadow. I haven't even chosen between the two. And just remember what jargon is. It's a way of keeping people from understanding what you're talking about. So when I talk about my imprimatur, my verdaccio, or the grisaille, or the sfumato, these are all things that I can say where someone who doesn't study art will feel like they have no idea what I'm talking about. It's in music, it's in archery, it's in science, and everything. You get the terminology that always, when you're hearing them talk, you know, blockchain. What's a blockchain? So it's always, until you learn, you always feel like an outsider. So that's what I always try to remind myself whenever I'm learning a new thing, is, and I don't understand, is try and learn the jargon. So now I've done a dark shadow. So now I'm going to paint You can see here I'm lightening it up. A lighter shadow, and this is a cross mixture. And now you can see my dark before, what looked dark, now looks actually brownish. And this is also the thing about painting, that as painting progresses, each stage will have a new character to it. And it will make the other stage look like an earlier stage, sometimes. And there's nothing wrong with even leaving a painting at an earlier stage. So now this is my middle shadow, and now I'm gonna do a light shadow. And you see, here as I'm mixing, I'm almost mixing as it gets away from there and mixing lighter. So there's my light shadow. And I'm going to do the same thing here. There's a little bit of medium. And at every stage, I'm doing corrections or adjustments. So now that I'm doing that, I'm going to make this darker, my dark shadow. It's just constantly adjusting. And there's a story that I have it's probably not true, but I wish it was, that Pope Julius II was very impatient with Michelangelo when he was working on the Capella Sistina, the Sistine Chapel. And basically because Michelangelo had painted most of it, I think, and then realized that he was using assistants and it wasn't good enough. So he replastered the entire ceiling and started again, supposedly without using assistants. Again, I don't know what is true and what was written by Vasari and Lives of the Artists and elaborated, but anyway, it was taking a long time. And so Pope Julius II came into the Capella Sistina all angry, and he goes, "Hey, Mikey, when's it going to be finished? Why is it taking so long?" And Michelangelo Buonarroti looked down at Pope Julius II, and he said, "It'll be finished when it's finished." I don't know if that's true or not. Love it. But that's how I feel about this, that it'll be finished when I look at it and I think, oh, it's working. And, sometimes that's right away. And sometimes, in the case of my own paintings, it can take months. And I always think, the hardest thing is to say, when is a painting finished? And for me, my answer is when it doesn't annoy me. When I can actually hang it on my wall, and I'm not going to say, I wish I had just spent a little bit more time doing this, or I wish I had spent a little bit more time doing that. And so sometimes the hardest part of the painting for me is painting to that point where I can live with it. If I'm selling it, it's not as big an issue, because if you're selling it, you're not looking at it every day. But if it's on your own wall, all the mistakes, all the things you wish you'd spent more time on start to stare at you. And I have actually taken paintings that I'd finished like 5 or 6 years before and gone back into them and made them better. So right now I'm just starting to do a little bit of dark here on this side, and again working on my line, taking paint off. Now if you notice here, as I put the darker tones on, that I've lost my halftone. And that's what I said earlier, I have to fight for my halftones. So I'm going to do it again, but first I'm going to actually still darken my core shadow, because darkening my core shadow is going to do something quite interesting, which is going to make my middle lights and my light lights brighter, because everything is relationships. And the way to not get muddy in oil paint is to be aware of those relationships. So as I go darker there, that makes that lighter. So I'm going to give you another word now for what this light can be. I'm going to get back to the cylinder in a moment, but right now, let me work on this sphere, this ball. And there's another word for this light, and you will all know it. Excuse me, a light shadow. I've really just confused you all. This is a light shadow, not a light. So a light shadow is not always a reflected light, but a reflected light is always a light shadow. And so let me explain what that means. The reflected light is light reflected into a shadow. So if anybody's ever seen a shoot on a film shoot or a photography shoot, and they have these large reflectors, what they're doing is they're reflecting light into the shadow area so that there isn't a stark contrast between the light world and the shadow world. They soften the shadow. So reflected light. One thing that reflected light never is light. That is the light world. That is not the light world. So reflected light, in this case, the reflected light is also going to reflect not just light, it's going to reflect the color. I'm going to have it reflecting the color of the green, even though it would be reflecting the table, which would be whiter. So let me do a little bit. And you can see here, I'm going to put in the reflected light here and here. So reflected light. Now, there's always an exception to everything I say. There is a time when a reflected light looks like a light, and that is if you're doing a painting of a Harley Davidson motorcycle and you're doing the exhaust. And that type of chrome, the reflected light can in fact be as bright as a light. So if you're painting chrome, that's the exception. But on most objects, the reflected light is always going to be, if you blurred your vision, by squinting your eyes, or you took off your glasses, you will see that it falls into the shadow world. It is not part of the light world. So one of the mistakes that artists will make is making your reflected light look as bright as your light. Again, if you're painting a motorcycle, especially a Harley, you can do that, but otherwise don't. So right now, I have my light, my middle light, my dark light, my halftone, my dark shadow, my middle shadow, my light shadow, which is a reflected light. Now right here, you can see in the cylinder, I have not gotten a good halftone. Matter of fact, I haven't been really working on my cylinder. So let me do this. I'm going to actually go a little bit darker here, because how do you make an area brighter? If you've gone pure white, how do you get brighter than pure white? Well, you do it by making the background darker. Again, relationships. And right here, I'm going to cut into this a little bit. I don't know if I'm doing a perfect circle. This is all done by hand, not by compass. If you do feel you have a need to make a perfect circle, there's a compass, or there's a trick with a string that you can do to get a very good circle. I just always like having a imperfect circle and drawing it by hand, because it's always this demo is always an excuse for me to practice what I preach. And so here I'm doing something that you'll see very much in old masters. In my relationship of my background, I am putting a darker background against the lighter area, and I'm going to do a lighter background against my darker area. And you're going to see this if next time you look at like portraits in a book, like look at Velázquez. I'm going to apologize to everybody who is Spanish. I know that he's pronounced Velázquez, but I say Edward Hooper. So there we go. I'm going to mispronounce the Americans as well as the Spanish. And so here you'll see in a Velázquez painting, you'll see a portrait, and on the shadow side of the portrait, it's going to be lighter. And on the light side of the portrait, it's going to be darker. You'll see that in so many paintings. You'll see it in Manet. You'll see it in Holbein. You will see it in Rembrandt. You'll see it Mary Cassatt. Just go through, you know, any art books and you will see it. You'll see it in Van Gogh. Van Gogh. So here you can see lighter to the dark, darker to the light. And while I'm doing all this, I'm correcting my edges, or as my great paint teacher in my senior year of high school in Brooklyn said, great painting is great edges. And what I've translated to be in a simpler way is attend all edges. Be responsible for your edges. Be responsible if you want an edge that's unfinished or scumbled and incomplete. Just be responsible for it and make sure it works. If you want an edge that's very finished, like in a Vermeer, be responsible for it. And realize that your edges can control control the eye, control space, control the materials that something is made of. Like something made out of steel might have much harder edge, let's say, than something like fur. Fur might have a very soft edge. A beard might have a soft edge. Metal's going to have a hard edge. You know, this palette knife. It's going to have a harder edge, let's say, than even the side of my face. That my side of my face will not be as hard as this machined metal. And by controlling your edges, you can start to describe what objects are made of. And again, this is all for naturalist painting, but even if I was an abstract painter, I would still think about edges, because sharp edges come forward and soft edges recede. So here I'm against the tabletop. Here I'm going to go darker again. And you can see my strokes. These are now bigger strokes than before when I'm softening. And now I'm going to go back to the cylinder, because that has been my neglected part of the painting, is a cylinder. And I think in almost all my demos I've ever done of this, I don't think I've ever paid as much attention to the cylinder as a sphere. Don't ask me why. So now I will start to attend the cylinder, even though the sphere seems to be my favorite part to render in this exercise, in this demo. Now, I'm going to have to soften this for my halftone, the blurred edge between the light world and the shadow world on a curved object. And this object, of course, is curving around like that. So let me start to do that. First, I'm going to start by going darker in my shadow here. Oh, and guys, if you are wondering what I just did here, remember, it's just paint. I can get rid of that in 2 seconds. Now that I've said 2 seconds, it'll probably take me 10 seconds. That's about how much paint I have. And now I'm going to start working on my halftone. And to do this, I'm just going to keep doing these soft strokes. Fight for my halftone. It is a fight. I'm going to take some paint off this. And just these hatch marks over and over. I might take my brush without paint. It has some mineral spirits, you see. I don't know if it shows, but it's a little wet. If I'm painting with a brush without paint, I do not want mineral spirits or solvent on my brush, because it will remove paint. So I want to just, again, soften without, all right, I can't seem to get it all off. So I'm just going to soften, get rid of that line. This is not quite the Bottigiando, this is more of a scrub. But you can see I just keep going over it. So if you're like, I can't get my halftone, I see the demo, I see what he's doing, he makes it look so easy and I can't do it. It's not easy for me. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm just going over it and over it again until I can get that blurred line. This is what the invention of the airbrush did. I'm not sure when the airbrush was invented, but atomizers, the airbrushes, all of a sudden you could get that blurred line. I remember as a teenager having an airbrush to do things, and that was my favorite thing to do, was to do just that blurred edge. But for old master painting, it does take a lot of work. But, you know, it's not bad work. I enjoy it. So I've always enjoyed doing this demo. So now you can see I'm starting. I don't know how many times I've gone over this since I've started talking, but it's many times. And as I'm doing it, it's starting to turn. Now this line here that I did, just paint it out. And this dark right here, I'll just use it. And matter of fact, now I don't want a white table, I've decided. I just did that in the beginning because I only wanted to show you two colors. So I have this green, and now I'm going to mix that green with black, make a darker green. Let's see how that looks. See how this, there's no wrong color. There's wrong values or wrong value relationships, but any color you choose, like let's say I just did this green here to get to the bottom part. There's also be this cast shadow. I'm not going to go, you just remember that the ball is over here. I'm not going to paint that. And then in that case, I will now adjust this. Maybe I have this raw sienna I haven't used. Remember, this is for my flesh palette, my limited flesh palette, but you know, maybe I'll add a little black to my raw sienna, which will make it greenish. Let's see how this looks. And I can start correcting drawing and get my cylinder looking a little bit better. Here, oof. Oof. Again, another technical term which means ugly. I don't like that at all. It just, not against a green. I am going to go green. I'm going to make this a green and gray painting. I'll use a little bit of that raw sienna in my green. Just change, now we're talking. Color, liking color, disliking color is subjective. When I said oof, that was just me not liking it. But you see, I'm not even wiping away the color. I'm just incorporating it in to what I had. So I'm just going to paint that away where it was white, make this bright. There's the table, which I had chips in it before. I might go back and do the chips. I'm going to go a little bit darker here. Again, I'm just going to adjust with that, the raw sienna in with the Viridian in white, just to get something. And I'm going to have that gradation, rule of gradation from my, and gradation is when, this is all gradation, but gradation even happens on flat surfaces. And that's because light hits one surface, makes it brighter, and then goes darker. So that's my rule of gradation. And what does gradation do in compositionally? It moves the eye. And the whole, I'll go ahead, because one day I'm going to do a real lecture on composition, but I'm going to give you my number one rule of composition. My number one rule of composition is to keep the viewer's eye on my painting in a group show and not have it go over to your painting. The number one rule of composition is how long can I keep your eye looking at my work? So I'll manipulate light, I will manipulate angles, the rule of the stare, someone looking at you, anything I can do to keep you looking at my painting. And then every other rule of gradation, rule of dark edges, rule of procession, so many rules. The rule of the dark triangle. All of these other rules I've come up with are just rules, just techniques I've seen through thousands of years of art that have been used to control the viewer's eye. It's really, it's visual manipulation. So composition is really very, very important. And so gradation, which I'm doing here, and you notice I just went back in, I'm making this darker, and I'm gonna make it a little bit lighter on this side, because this is, I'll actually come back and make that even darker. For the darks to lights and lights to darks. Light against dark and dark against light creates depth. So here I'm doing the light against the dark, and that creates depth, right? Remember we talked about muddiness in oil paint? The way to not stay muddy is to understand the play of values, which is exactly what you do in charcoal and pencil. Here I'm softening the edge because the table is going back in the background. And in this case, I'm softening the edge by just doing this and this. Just very softly dragging the brush in the center. Here I'm not going to want to do that. In fact, I'm going to want a harder edge. And I'm going to also, and I know this is a ball and cylinder, but again, everything is relationships. So you can see that my tube has gotten very funky there. And by funky, I mean bad drawing. I will correct it because it is just paint. So those are long strokes. I'm going back to hatch strokes. And now I'm going to take another brush. So this line has become very funky. That's another technical term. And I have to straighten it out. And I'm embarrassed because I did start out this this demo by saying I could teach you how to draw a straight line, and here I am not doing it. So I'm going to correct it, and correcting it from the outside in, and let's see, and then here I'll correct it from the inside out. And once you understand that about oil paint, that you can just sort of push it around like clay, that while it's wet, you can take a cloth to it and just, you know, do that. You can, there's all these things that it's just paint. It really gives you the freedom to learn how to play with this incredible medium. And if you ever want to know how incredible it is, just look at the history of painting. Just look at, you know, anyone from de Kooning using oil-based house paints to Giovanni Bellini, and there's every way to work with it. And you'll have people say, oh, this is the way, or that artist wasn't good, or this artist was great, but in the end, they all created objects, and then the rest of it is taste. It's like talking about food to talk about art, like someone saying, oh, I love Mexican food, and someone saying, oh, I can't stand anything that's spicy, or I don't like fish, or everybody has an opinion, everybody has tastes, and you just develop your own tastes and believe in it. If you do that, you'll, and it's a very natural process. I mean, it's just like, what do I like? So here I'm just doing some strokes. I'm going to now just work very quickly on a reflected light there. I'll add a little green to it. You can see I'm cross-mixing like mad now. Here, I'll add even more green because of the table. And reflected light is reflected light and color into the shadow world. It is not a light. Now, there's a couple of other things I haven't told you yet. So I'm going to use a thin airbrush for this. So I have explained to you highlights, middle lights, dark lights, halftone, the blurred edge, dark shadow, also known as coarse shadow, middle shadow, light shadow, sometimes known as a reflected light. Now I'm going to give you another term. It's called an accent. An accent is a term I probably didn't make up. Someone probably told me, but I don't know who, which is a line that shows where one object meets another. Like if you've ever painted lips, and I'll do my lips closed, but it's that line, or the line of an eyelid, or a line where a jar is on a table. It's where it's that little thin line where one object meets another. So right now, this ball and cylinder are two separate objects, but I have them mostly painted as one object. And what I'm going to do now is draw a line there. I don't have a maul stick in my hand. A maul stick is a stick that allows you to not rest your hand on your painting, which I do often. So I'm going to use a brush as a maul stick. And I'm going to paint my accent. And this accent just shows that there's weight of the ball on here. Whoops, and I'll have to get to that. Because this had mineral spirits on it, it just took away paint. And I'm also going to do this accent right here. And give that weight. So you'll see, like if you look at a Bruegel painting of a bunch of peasants in a village dancing around a table, and they have those great shoes that they were all wearing in Bruegel's time, and you'll see underneath it, he'll put a glazed line, very thin underneath the shoes where they're meeting the floor, and it gives them weight. It reminds you that there's gravity holding us to Earth. So that's my accent, that's my accent. This area right here, I'm just going to soften, again, push the paint around. So even like your mistakes, you can just do it really quickly. I'm going to go really dark here. And then I'm going to talk about two more things in this demo. Application of different applications of paint. Right now I'm just reasserting my dark shadow next to the halftone. And by reasserting my dark shadow, it makes my reflected light, my light shadow, brighter. And I will also just very quickly paint the edge of this table, the darker green. There, that's an olive. Starting to almost look like not quite as nice, but my Wellington Vert Noir. So shameless plug, buy it. Use it. Live it. Love it. It's a really lovely color, and there are two of them. There's Vert Noir and there's Vert Noir Deep. And especially for people who like to paint en plein air or paint landscapes, it has a much more old master feel than, let's say, a cadmium green. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit more Claude Lorraine or Rusdel, the Vert Noir will get you there. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about cast shadows. So there is a rule with cast shadows. This is the rule of cast shadows, that the object, as the shadow is closer to the object, the shadow is darker. Here, I'll make it darker. And the edges are sharper. Now, they're never as sharp as the object. So if you have a soft object and hard edges, it's going to look a little weird. And in this case, I do have soft edges there. So let me make a couple of adjustments. And I will to make this rule work. But the shadow is always going to be sharper and darker. When I say always, in fact, not always, because sometimes there's multiple light sources and there's other things. But I'm saying if I was to set it up under perfect circumstances, that's how it would be. So, and as it moves away from the object, the shadow gets lighter and the edges get more blurred. So that's in nature, and right now, put put everything on pause and look around and look at cast shadows and see if what I'm saying is true. Now, any rules I'm giving you don't have to be followed because this is art, which means you can be like De Chirico, who knew the rules of perspective, but then played with the rules of perspective, or Escher, MC Escher, the same thing. So you can learn rules and then disregard them to have effects. So, but if you want something to be naturalistic, it's good to know the rules. So at least you can make it naturalistic if you want. Of course, you know, in art, it's playing and distorting and manipulating and not always being true. Even when it appears to be true, that makes things interesting. All right, so I'm gonna have to still work on this bottom of the cylinder, but you get the idea. And now here, it's gonna be not hard, right? Because it can't be harder than, the shadow cannot be harder than the object casting it. But it's gonna be softer, but as it gets further away, it's going to get lighter and more blurred. There we go. Until it's here, it's just going to be a full blur. And here, same thing. It's going to be sharper here. And as it pulls away, make sure there's no paint on it. As it pulls away here, this is not a maul stick, this is my pinky. But when I don't have a maul stick and I'm not using a brush, I will try and put a pinky somewhere here to stabilize. At some point, I will paint with a maul stick to show you. I think maul means stick in German. I can be corrected on that. I'm sure I will be. So it might be a redundancy. I'm just going to quickly make this brighter. It's missing, this was missing its light. See, I have my light there. This was missing its light. And just because I need that as a harder edge. So closer, sharper, darker next to the object that's casting, and as it moves away, lighter and more blurred. And if you just know that as a rule, you can always go refer back to it. And then again, you can also disregard it because it's art. And art is about learning rules and then making art. But what's great is about these rules are that sometimes when something's not looking right, you know, everything has to do with your intention. So if something's not looking right, and you have a soft object and you have this hard lined cast shadow and you don't like it, go back to this rule. But if you do like it, then disregard the rule. I know it seems like I'm really easygoing about art, but in my own, I'm about to start a drawing class in New York City for sophomores, and I won't be so easygoing. I'll be making them get it right. But that's just for a classroom situation, because you do want people sometimes to really understand the basics before they disregard the basics. Because if you break the rule knowing the rule, you will break it effectively and for effect. And if you just don't ever bother to learn these rules, you can get lucky and do something great, but you can get lucky. It's art. But it depends. Going a little bit thicker paint. See, each time I blend, I darken it. So I'm doing something now which I call reestablishing the lights. And I will say, as a painter, along with fighting for my halftones, the reestablishing the lights is something I do all the time. So I could keep working on this and make it nicer. As a matter of fact, I'll just do a couple. I wanted to chip this table. So now the last thing I'm going to do, although there's never a last, is there, is show you the different applications of paint. And I'm just going to sort of codify it. Now, this is not every application of paint, but this is sort of an old master idea. So the first application of paint, and again, I'm going to give you jargon, which is words, and you can see on my brush is a giant thick area of thick glob of paint. And I'm going to put that glob right here. In fact, I'll make it even globbier. There we go. Wow. That I'm going to call impasto. Impasto, paste, thick paint off the canvas. That is the brightest way of applying paint. There is nothing brighter than this. And the reason is because that all these ridges that stick out refract light and they pop them up. And that's why many highlights when you're looking at old master paintings are these globs of paint. You'll see it in Bruegel, you'll see it in Turner, you'll see it everywhere. And when they dry, you can glaze over it like what a Turner might do, and then you get incredible effects. So nothing is brighter than impasto. Now I did talk about once you take impasto, here I'll do another impasto right here, somewhat impasto, and you start hitting it, see? I'll put it up close. That is relatively, to the best of my ability in one coat. It gets darker. And this is opaque. So impasto is bright, and once you go opaque, it dulls down. But I hope that this shows you, gives you some vocabulary, gives you some understanding, an illusion of impasto for the light, the middle light, the dark light, the halftone, the dark shadow, otherwise known as core shadow, the middle shadow, the light shadow, which is also a reflected light and where color gets reflected, cast shadow versus form shadow, cast shadow being harder on the edge as it's closer to the object that's casting it, and just do a correction, and softening, getting lighter as it pulls away. And also in this, and often in portraiture, lighter backgrounds against the darker areas and darker backgrounds against the lighter areas to create space, so that even though this is both a green background, in fact, the value is shifting around it. So I hope you got something from this. Again, these are all just suggestions. These are things to help you ease into oil painting. I hope that some of you who've been afraid of oil painting will look at this and really not be afraid. Just remember, it's just paint. You know, you can mess up. You can wipe away. I'll do one last thing just to go and show you how easy this is. Take a little mineral spirits and just wipe. It's just paint. You can just start over, do something else. You can let it dry and paint a portrait on top of it. It's really, the great thing about oil painting is it just gives you a lot of freedom, especially freedom to make mistakes. Okay, I hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye.